Jeff, what exactly is going on with the organization you're working with?
Well, we're even more nuanced, and we are Black Men Vote, which is relatively new. Our focus is totally and completely GOTV. And so we're targeting 18 to 34-year-old Black men who are primarily first-time voters and unlikely voters. We understand that African-American women in particular were the largest demographic to vote for President Obama in 2008. But we need Black men to step up in a real way. And they, very frankly, are not really engaged by many of the ads that we see on the air, by the campaigns. And we want to make sure we're also going to some of the non-traditional places to do this GOTV. So we're going to bars and lounges and housing complexes, transit centers, places in many cases that the campaign can't go. And we're also using messengers that in many cases the campaign can't use to be able to engage this demographic that in a very close race in places like Ohio and Virginia can turn the tide.
Now, both of what you all are talking about, Julian and Jeff, sounds really interesting, and it sounds like good work, getting people more engaged civically, getting people out there to vote. It sounds important, but it doesn't sound to me what a traditional super PAC is. When I think about super PACs, again, I think about an interest. It sounds to me more like a get out the vote campaign, like a rock the vote kind of thing.
Well, I think when we're talking about super PAC, Marks, we still have to just realize that it's less what is the desire of the super PAC and how are they outreaching. It's how do they raise money and what do they have the capability to use that money to do. And so we are a super PAC from the standpoint of our registration, our classification. We're a super PAC and how we raise money. But how we decide to focus that money, the outreach that we decide to use and the demographic that we decide to focus on is what makes us non-traditional. So often African Americans per capita are some of the most philanthropic people in the country, but we're seldom strategically philanthropic and seldom do we give hardcore to political campaigns. And so I think what Julian is talking about and what I'm talking about is also nuanced from the standpoint that we are getting both large and small donors to be very strategic in utilizing their money to affect political change, which is something that as a community we need to begin to do better. There is a small group of individuals from the African-American community who max out with the president or who max out with a congressional candidate. But those percentages are so small that our presence on the giving stage sometimes leaves us out of certain conversations. And that's another reason why these super PACs are so important. They signify a shift in how African Americans are giving from a political standpoint. There's two things at play. Yes, we are partisan. Yes, we do want to see President Obama back in the White House. So let's be very clear about that. I think also in this game that we're playing, this political game, there also is how do we begin to set precedent for how we begin to engage, not just in presidential cycles, but in local cycles. So we have folks that are giving us money, not just to move Black men 18 to 34 to the polls, not just to go and get them in places where we haven't traditionally gotten them, and not just to turn them out for President Obama, but to say, how do we engage people in mayoral races this time next year? How do we engage people so that we don't see the same thing happening in 2014 that we saw happening in 2010? How do we begin to make sure that
let me pause on that, Jeff, because you just said something important. I want to make sure all of the viewers understand what you mean when you say what happened in 2010. You're talking about 2008 mass voter registration, mass entry into the polls. In 2010, Obama's not on the ticket, and Republicans win a lot of local elections, win a lot of House seats because we didn't come back out and vote.
Because we didn't engage, and the organizations that were supposed to be engaged in getting people out, educating them on the issues, mobilizing them around House races and down ballot initiatives just didn't do it. And so we've got to change the way we engage politically. And I think these super PACs that we're seeing, Black Men Vote and 1911 United, are a start to push in the right direction to really take some of the weight off some of the organizations that really were ill-equipped from a capacity standpoint to be able to do some of these things, but also hopefully creating some multi-level partnerships where we're beginning to help build capacity of folks at the local level to do what they did. We've got a grant process that we're going to be going through where we're going to be putting money on the ground to some of those folks that are doing grassroots work. And it doesn't even necessarily have to be through an organization. We just have to be able to prove capacity and really trying to reinvigorate some grassroots local organizing based on increasing capacity of folks to do work. I think that there is a way that this game is played And I think that we should try to do the right thing. I think our community doesn't necessarily respond the same way to negative ads that other communities do. And I think the goal is for us to engage our communities. And by that, I mean African-American communities, even within the complexity of what that means, with education, with information, with the tools for mobilization to move our communities the way we have since we had the right to vote, but in some cases just haven't galvanized the right resources. For me, for Black Men Vote, this is about how do we use resources traditionally used for likely voters to go get those men who, with the right kind of stimuli, would turn out to the polls. That's our goal. There really is an opportunity to go one way or the other. I think what's interesting about our organizations is that so often there is a sense of community ownership. And the question is going to be with organizations like 1911 United and Black Men Vote, does the community to begin to feel ownership over them to the degree that they start giving? And even as there are larger donors that give, is there a sense of accountability? And I think that could go either way. I mean, money corrupts, and let's be honest about it. We all know that there are organizations that we think should be fighting for one thing, but behind the scenes, they've got large donors that shift their ideological focus. And those are civil rights organizations. And let's be honest about it. So there is the possibility of that kind of corruption, Mark. And if we say that there's not, we are out of our minds. So my hope is that organizations like 1911 United and Black Men Vote, one, have board representation that's connected to the community, begin to be connected to the community enough where the community feels the ability to hold folks accountable and call folks out, but also has a comprehensive enough development strategy where they see clearly the value in getting I want a $500,000 donor. I'll give you my cell phone number, my home address. You can call me today if you want to write that check. But I don't discount the fact that there is power in getting $1,100,000 donations, because it speaks to what that's where the game change is, Mark.
Exactly.
The game change is, how do we become the tributary for regular people who want to have strategic political power? That's the game change. And if we can have a level of integrity to that, we will see the game change, not just in presidential cycles, but especially in local and midterm elections.
Absolutely.